Emily Sanders slammed her foot on the gas, heart racing as the world around her blurred into streaks of red and gray. Within minutes, she had smashed into 3 parked cars, leaving a trail of chaos in her wake, and then, without a second thought, she ran straight to her mother's house, as if fleeing the law could somehow be solved by the safety of home. The sun hung low over Brookhaven, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. It was a Sunday afternoon that felt ordinary in every sense. Birds chirped lazily, a few kids rode their bikes down the sidewalks, and the occasional dog walker strolled past with their leash in hand. The neighborhood had a sense of calm, the kind of calm that made even small disturbances feel shocking. People were enjoying their routines, oblivious to the chaos that was about to descend. At first, it was just a distant sound, a sharp squeal of tires cutting through the otherwise peaceful hum of the town. Some neighbors glanced up from their porches but thought little of it. Cars sped by on Maple Avenue all the time. But then came the crunch, sudden and jarring, like a hammer striking metal. It was followed by another and then another, each one echoing down the street. Windows rattled and alarms blared from the parked cars. People began running toward their windows or stepping out onto their porches to see what had happened. A red compact car had appeared out of nowhere, careening down the avenue with no regard for anything in its path. Its driver swerved wildly, narrowly avoiding pedestrians and clipping the corners of parked vehicles. The first car was hit head-on, its front bumper crumpled, metal twisted, and paint scraped away. As the driver struggled to control the car, the second parked car was struck with a loud crunch, sliding forward slightly before coming to rest. The third impact was even worse. A large SUV parked tightly against the curb was pushed against a mailbox, leaving shards of glass scattered across the asphalt. The scene looked like a chaotic puzzle, metal and glass interwoven in a way that stunned onlookers. Neighbors shouted at one another, some running toward the accident, others reaching for their phones. The noise was overwhelming, the blaring car alarms, the crunch of metal, and the occasional shout of fear. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the red car sped away. The vehicle lurched into motion, tires screeching as it disappeared down a side street, leaving behind chaos and confusion. People rushed out into the street, inspecting the damage and calling the police, but the driver was gone, vanished without a trace. As the dust settled, neighbors began piecing together what had happened. The damage to the cars was severe, but not catastrophic. Thankfully, no one had been hit by the car itself. The air, however, still carried the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline, a stark reminder that danger had just passed through their normally peaceful street. Conversations started spreading quickly. Who could have done this? Was the driver drunk or worse? Nobody had seen a person inside the car, only fleeting glimpses of the red blur that had caused so much destruction. What unsettled the community most wasn't just the crash itself, but the recklessness behind it. The driver hadn't slowed down, hadn't stopped to assess the damage or check on the owners of the cars. It was as if the act had been done in a panic, a blur of motion and adrenaline, leaving fear and confusion in its wake. By the time the police arrived, the scene had turned into a mixture of chaos and curiosity. Neighbors huddled in small groups, sharing what they had seen, pointing toward the direction the car had fled, wondering how someone could vanish so completely. Amid the sirens and the flashing lights, one thought echoed in everyone's mind. In a quiet town like Brookhaven, such reckless violence was foreign, almost impossible to imagine. And yet it had happened in broad daylight, leaving behind a trail of mangled metal, broken glass, and a mystery that begged for answers. After the crash, the red compact car seemed to vanish as completely as its driver. Witnesses described seeing it swerve violently before slipping into a network of side streets that crisscrossed the older part of Brookhaven. It moved erratically, the driver struggling to maintain control, brushing against curbs and narrowly avoiding lampposts. Some residents followed at a distance, hoping to catch a glimpse, but the car melted into the labyrinth of quiet neighborhoods where the roads twisted and turned in ways that made it easy to disappear. By the time anyone could react, the vehicle had gone, leaving the aftermath on Maple Avenue behind like a grim reminder of a storm that had passed. The abandoned car eventually appeared tucked away in a secluded cul-de-sac, hidden behind thick hedges that shielded it from the main road. It wasn't parked with any care, it had been left crooked, one tire partially on the curb. Inside, items were scattered across the seats and floor: loose change, a half-empty coffee cup, a crumpled grocery receipt, a jacket tossed over the passenger seat. The interior told a story of hasty departure, of someone fleeing in panic without thinking about what they were leaving behind. There was no sign of the driver. She had vanished on foot, blending into the ordinary routines of the town as if she had never existed. Police quickly traced the car to its registered owner. It wasn't long before detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, questioning witnesses and reviewing security cameras. Residents recounted fragments: a flash of red moving erratically, a figure running from the vehicle, the sense of urgency that seemed almost desperate. The driver had not simply fled an accident, she had fled something more personal, something that made her abandon all reason and common sense. Rumors began circulating. Some speculated she had been drinking, others believed she was fleeing from someone, and a few whispered darker possibilities, though nobody could say for sure. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a portrait of the driver began to emerge. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, known to some neighbors as quiet and unassuming. There was nothing outwardly alarming about her life, no obvious signs of instability, no recent confrontations or disturbances. Yet the act of hitting 3 cars and disappearing suggested a tension beneath the surface, a story that no one could have predicted. The calm streets of Brookhaven had sheltered her, but they also masked a deeper recklessness that had gone unnoticed until now. Meanwhile, the people who had witnessed the crash continued to talk among themselves, replaying the events in their minds. Many felt a mixture of fear and disbelief. It wasn't just that 3 cars had been damaged. It was the audacity of the act, the cold calculation or panic that allowed someone to flee so completely. Neighbors checked their own vehicles, worried that further incidents might occur. Some speculated about her mental state, others about her motives, but nothing seemed to fit neatly. It was as if the ordinary, quiet life of Brookhaven had been pierced by a sudden and inexplicable recklessness that left everyone questioning how well they truly knew the people around them. The investigation began to deepen. Officers examined tire tracks, skid marks, and the pattern of collisions. Every detail suggested a driver in distress, someone trying to escape more than just the immediate consequences of hitting parked cars. Yet, despite the clues, the trail went cold after the car was abandoned. The young woman had disappeared into the network of streets surrounding her home, eluding immediate capture and leaving law enforcement with more questions than answers. The quiet neighborhoods of Brookhaven, once a symbol of safety, had become the backdrop for a puzzle that seemed to grow stranger the more it was examined. The red compact car had disappeared, but the driver had not vanished randomly. Instead, she ran with a purpose, navigating the streets with a mix of desperation and familiarity. Every turn she took seemed calculated, almost instinctive, as if she knew exactly where she needed to go. Her escape route was not toward the outskirts of town or any place she could blend in with strangers. It led directly to a house she knew well, a modest, unassuming home tucked away on a quiet street only a few blocks from where the accident had occurred. It was her mother's house. The streets between the crash site and her destination were lined with familiar landmarks: a small park with a rusted swing set, a corner store with a faded sign, the mailbox of an elderly neighbor who always waved. She avoided drawing attention, slipping through side streets and alleyways, ducking behind parked cars when anyone glanced her way. Each step was hurried but careful, as if she understood that being seen could undo her escape. Even so, her movements carry the unmistakable tension of someone who had been caught in the whirlwind of their own recklessness and was now trying to find safety, or perhaps forgiveness, at the only place she thought could offer it. When she reached the house, she didn't hesitate. She sprinted up the small set of steps leading to the porch, the worn boards creaking under her weight. The front door opened easily, revealing the dim interior she knew so well. She disappeared inside, closing the door softly behind her as though trying to erase the sound of the crash and the chaos that had followed. Neighbors noticed the sudden motion but did not immediately understand what they had seen. From the outside, it was just another young woman entering her home, but to anyone who knew the day's events, it was an unsettling sight. Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense and quiet. The woman moved through familiar rooms with rapid, almost nervous steps, her eyes darting toward every corner as if expecting someone to appear. Her suitcase, half-packed and haphazard, lay on the floor, a testament to plans interrupted or perhaps hastily abandoned. There was an urgency to her actions, but also a strange sense of relief in being somewhere familiar. The house, which had always been a place of safety and comfort, suddenly became the backdrop for an unfolding mystery, a stark contrast to the calm and ordinary life that had existed there just hours earlier. Outside, the neighborhood began to stir. Word of the crash had spread quickly, and people began speculating not only about what had happened on Maple Avenue, but also about the driver's disappearance. Some wondered if she had fled the city entirely, while others guessed she might be hiding in a relative's house. When police traced the red compact car back to her name, suspicions intensified. Detectives began piecing together the possibility that she had a specific destination in mind, one that would explain the precision with which she navigated the streets after leaving the scene. By the time law enforcement arrived at her mother's house, the scene had taken on a charged atmosphere. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispers passing from one porch to another. Inside, the young woman was no longer just a reckless driver. She was a person enmeshed in a web of fear, secrecy, and desperation. Her flight to her mother's home revealed not just the physical journey she had undertaken, but the deeper, more personal story behind her actions, a story that was only beginning to unfold, one that would soon reveal layers of hidden motives, concealed truths, and unexpected revelations that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. By the time the police arrived at the small, modest house, the tension in the neighborhood had become palpable. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance as officers approached cautiously, aware that the situation could escalate at any moment. The windows were dark, curtains drawn tightly, giving the home an air of secrecy and isolation. It looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, the atmosphere was charged with anxiety and a strange sense of inevitability. The young woman had barricaded herself in a familiar space, one that offered both comfort and concealment. Inside the house, she sat in the living room, knees pulled close, staring at a half-packed suitcase on the floor. Her breaths were shallow and rapid, the adrenaline of the chase slowly giving way to exhaustion and fear. Each sound outside, the faint murmur of neighbors, the creak of the porch, the distant bark of a dog made her flinch. The house, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. There was no one else home at that moment, only her, the remnants of hurried escape scattered around, and the weight of the consequences she could no longer avoid. As the officers moved in, they noticed the house was unusually quiet. No confrontations, no shouting, just a tense stillness. When they opened the door and stepped inside, they found her trembling in the living room, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline. Her eyes darted nervously from one officer to another, registering their presence but not speaking. It was a moment suspended in time, a collision between law enforcement and a person cornered not just by circumstance but by her own choices. The search of the home revealed more than the officers anticipated. Hidden under the bed and in various drawers were receipts, cash bundles, and several small items that didn't belong to the household. There were clues that connected her to a series of petty thefts and minor frauds around Brookhaven over the past year. The crash on Maple Avenue, initially perceived as reckless driving, now appeared to be part of a larger pattern of risky behavior and attempts to evade accountability. Each discovery added layers to the narrative. exposing a history of concealment, deception, and impulsive actions that had been hidden under the veneer of ordinary life. Neighbors who had gathered outside watched as police carefully documented the scene. Whispers spread quickly, each person piecing together fragments of what they saw, trying to make sense of the sudden revelations. The young woman's attempt to find refuge in her mother's house had inadvertently unveiled a network of secrets that extended far beyond a single accident. What had seemed like a desperate dash to escape immediate consequences was, in reality, the tipping point of a much longer story, a story of choices and patterns that had remained unnoticed until the chaos of the day brought them to light. The contrast between the woman's ordinary exterior and the hidden details uncovered inside the home left everyone in shock. She was no longer just a reckless driver who had fled the scene of a minor collision. She had become the focal point of a broader narrative, one that combined personal vulnerability, impulsive behavior, and criminal activity. The house, once a safe haven, had transformed into a stage where the truth could no longer be ignored. In that quiet living room, the web of her actions began to unravel, revealing a story that was as complicated and unpredictable as the day's chaotic events. The aftermath of the events at the small house rippled through Brookhaven like an unexpected storm. What had begun as a seemingly random, reckless act of hitting three parked cars had revealed a much deeper story, one that none of the neighbors could have anticipated. The young woman's flight to her mother's home had exposed not just a moment of panic, but a series of hidden actions that painted a far more complex picture of her life. Conversations spread quickly through the town, and even those who had never met her found themselves speculating about the circumstances and motives behind her behavior. The investigation expanded rapidly. Law enforcement documented the crash site, interviewed neighbors, and reviewed surveillance footage from surrounding streets and businesses. Each piece of evidence reinforced the idea that the day's chaos was more than a single lapse in judgment. The pattern of minor crimes, the hurried abandonment of the vehicle, and the careful but desperate path to her mother's house all suggested that the young woman had been living on the edge of legality for some time. Her actions had been impulsive, yes, but they also reflected a person trying to escape the consequences of a hidden life that had slowly spiraled out of control. Her mother, initially stunned and overwhelmed, became an important part of the unfolding story. She provided information about her daughter's habits, routines, and relationships, revealing that beneath the calm exterior there had been signs of restlessness and recklessness. The house that had been her daughter's refuge now became a central hub for understanding her behavior. Officers meticulously searched every corner, uncovering receipts, cash, and small stolen items that connected her to ongoing petty crimes in the area. Each discovery deepened the town's understanding of a story that had seemed straightforward at first glance but was now revealed to be full of layers and surprises. The town itself struggled to process what had happened. For a community used to quiet streets and predictable routines, the events of that day were a jarring disruption. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about how quickly the ordinary had turned into chaos and how someone they might have passed on the sidewalk could be living a secret life. The combination of recklessness, fear, and desperation in her actions created a narrative that was both shocking and strangely compelling. People were captivated not just by the crash itself, but by the human story behind it, the panic, the flight, and the unraveling of long-hidden secrets. As the legal process began, the young woman faced consequences that extended far beyond the initial collision. Reckless driving charges, property damage claims, and theft investigations combined to create a complex web of accountability. Yet the public fascination remained focused on the psychological and emotional aspects of her actions, the way a single afternoon could reveal so much about a person's hidden struggles and choices. The story served as a cautionary tale, illustrating how ordinary life could mask unexpected behaviors and how seemingly small decisions could snowball into events with far-reaching consequences. In the end, the chaotic crash on Maple Avenue became a turning point, not only for the young woman but for the entire community. The day that began with metal crunching and alarms blaring evolved into a story of exposure, revelation, and reflection. Brookhaven's quiet streets would eventually return to normal, but the memory of the woman who hit 3 cars and ran home to her mother lingered. A reminder that beneath the calmest surfaces, human behavior can be unpredictable, messy, and full of surprises. The incident left the town changed, leaving behind a story that combined suspense, mystery, and the unsettling truth that sometimes the most ordinary lives conceal the most extraordinary secrets.